Well, it's the 10th day of Squatchmas. I do hope you're ready for a little bit of a nail biter tonight. We're going to head into the wilds of northern Idaho. You ready? Yeah, I know you are. Let's go. Most of my Christmas memories are good, but I have one memory that is not so good. It's the year that I was taken by a Sasquatch. Here's what happened. When I was 12, my mom dropped the bomb on me that we would be spending the Christmas holidays with her new boyfriend Drew's family over in Idaho. I wasn't particularly happy about it. I would have preferred to stay home so I could see my friends, but there was nothing I could do about it. I wasn't asked. I was told. All said and done, the Christmas there with them was definitely very nice. Drew's parents, well, they were actual multimillionaires. His dad had worked for NASA until he retired. He was in their jet propulsion laboratory. He was a real rocket scientist. Drew's mom was now a retired orthopedic surgeon who had specialized in her career in pediatric orthopedic care. Their house in northern Idaho was incredible. I'm not saying exactly that it was like the Yellowstone Ranch. Well, it was close, and it had the look and it had the feel to it. My mom had lectured me all the way from Spokane to their house how I was to behave and act. She really wanted to make a good impression on them. Now, I'm not going to go into all the family that was there, who was who, and how they were related. There were more people there than I was able to keep a tab on when it was there and happening. And it's even less that I can remember about them almost 20 years later. Now, his mom had gone out of her way to make it very nice for me. I'll never forget that. I guess working with pediatrics for years, she was very in tune with kids. While my mom had told me to not expect that I would be included or get anything in the big gift exchange that would be happening, that I would only be getting what she had brought for me from Washington, well, that wasn't what happened. Drew's mom, the angel that she was, bought me just about as many gifts as she did her own grandchildren. And they were thoughtful gifts, too, and she barely knew me. I was open-mouthed with shock when the person who was passing out gifts that year kept calling out my name and then would walk over and drop off the most beautifully wrapped present I had ever seen in my life, over and over. I mean, these were wrapped with the thick foil wrapping paper you get from the department store, not the stuff my mom got from Walmart. There were ribbon bows that had wire edges. It was like some TV show. I remember I once looked up while unwrapping some of the gifts, and I saw Drew's mom smiling at me from across the room. She sort of lifted her crystal champagne flute full of breakfast mimosa, smiled and winked at me, and took a long drink. She really was a lovely woman. I was really overwhelmed and grateful for it all. Now, as for the other kids that were there in the family, none were exactly my age, and that did make it a little tough. They were either a lot younger than me, as in 9 years old and under, or a lot older than me, 15 years and up. So I wasn't old enough to hang with the older ones, and I was too old to play with the younger ones. It was a bit awkward. The one equalizer for all of us kids were the big sled saucers that Drew's mom had given to each of us. Now, up there in northern Idaho and in the mountains, there was a lot of snow that was just packed on and waiting for us. We all took our saucers and headed out to a somewhat clear area with a steep run, and we started climbing. Now, this area was well within sight of the house. We hadn't gone far, but it wasn't exactly right next to it. The further you went up this hill, the more woods on each side started coming in, making like an inverted V shape the closer you got to the top. We did a couple runs up and down, and then all of a sudden, a few of the younger kids that were climbing back up, they started screaming, and they came flying back down the hill. They got to the bottom, and they swore there was a monster up there in the trees looking at them. The older kids started making fun of them, calling them babies and telling them there was no such thing. Determined to show them there was no monster up there, together, we older boys, and of course I thought I was one of them, we all went up there together. We get up there and we don't see anything, of course. We yell back down and make some fun at them. Then they line up and hit their saucers on their bellies, and they go down, most of them hitting the little snow ramp they had made earlier, which of course sent them airborne and spiraling. Most of them wiped out after they hit that ramp. They would go one way, the saucer would go another way. Both of them would hit the snow. It was a good time had by all, according to them. Now, since we had lined up according to age, and I was the youngest, I was the last to go. I was about to throw my saucer down and jump on it when I hear all the kids at the bottom start screaming and pointing. I look over to my right, and there's what I could only call a monster coming right at me from the trees. I froze, unable to understand what was happening. It took another step or two, and then I could see its ugly face better. That's when I came unfroze. I threw my saucer down and hit the snow, hoping I could outsled it. Now, we had just moved to Spokane that year from Arizona, so I was pretty new to snow in general, never mind sledding. Steering a snow saucer, that was nothing I had mastered yet. As I went down, I was partway looking behind me and trying to steer ahead. I knew about the rough patches that slowed down the saucers, and I wanted to miss those. There was also that snow ramp I mentioned. I did not want to hit that. No one that day had hit that ramp and came back down with their saucer still under them. At 12 years old, I was a very skinny kid. I hadn't taken my big growing spurt yet. So that meant there wasn't a lot of weight to pick up speed with the saucer. And at the same time, I didn't have a lot of weight to stay on the saucer. I hit that ramp by accident. I had been trying to miss it, but I hit it at a running angle, and the next thing I knew, I was flying sideways toward the tree. It was like I was some foul ball in an MLB game. I remember the sensation of flying freely through the air. It was weightless and wonderful, and I was saucerless. Now, when I hit the snow, I hit hard enough to knock the air out of my lungs. I was stunned, and I couldn't move for a second or two. As I lay there, I heard the snow crunching, and then I felt myself being rolled over. It was the monster that had come at me from the trees. I tried to yell, but I didn't have any air in my lungs yet. It had large, dark eyes under a heavy brow ridge. Its forehead sloped back from the brow ridge straight up to a point. It was covered in a heavy, thick, smelly fur. Except for its lips and eyes and nose area, everything was covered in that fur, which was a dark brown color with reddish highlights. Also, there was no fur on the palms or the undersides of the fingers. I didn't have a sense of its physique or stature because it was bent down over me, but it picked me up as if I weighed nothing. I was scared more than I can ever write or explain. I was so scared that I couldn't yell, if you can believe that, even once I did get air back in my lungs. When it picked me up, it set me on my feet, like it wanted to see, could I stand up on my own? I did stand up, but I was wobbly, and as soon as I looked back up at the monster, I don't know what happened. I must have hit the snow again. The next time I came to, I was somewhere in the woods. The monster was holding me, which I was kind of glad for just a second, because I was so cold and it was so warm. But then as I opened my eyes, I realized I was cold because it had taken my coat and my shirt off. I saw them lying on the ground nearby. I was vaguely aware that my shoes had come off, and now the monster was tugging at my pants, right at the waistband. I tried to fight it, but how do you fight a Sasquatch? It peeled my pants off of me and peeled them to the ground. I fought it the whole time, but it was useless. I was really cold now. It was poking my legs and pinching the skin, like it wondered, did my skin come off the way my clothes did? Like it was trying to figure out, where was my fur? It then started poking around on my feet, poking and pulling at my toes, and it hurt. I let out a squeal. It suddenly stood up, grabbed me by my ankles, and held me upside down, and it started to sniff my feet. That is still the most terrifying moment in my life. I felt it sniffing my feet. It was handling me quite roughly. It clearly didn't care about me one bit. I was crying and begging for it to leave me alone. When I would cry, it would shake me roughly by my ankles like, "Shut up, little boy." It kept turning me all over, and it would sniff me like it was deciding where to start eating me. Then it made a startled sound, and it quickly turned its head like it was listening to something. For just a heartbeat I waited, and then I heard it too. It was the sound of motors. Then I saw a flash of sunlight, and I realized it was something reflecting off the plastic windshield of a snowmobile. I heard the Bigfoot growl, and he gripped my ankles very tight, like he was not going to give me up. He stood up, then threw me over his shoulder, and then off he went straight up the hillside. 2 of Drew's brothers were on those snowmobiles. The other kids had ran in the house screaming that a monster had taken me. Those 2 boys were the closest. They grabbed rifles, and they took off on their parents' snowmobiles. They came instead of Drew because, well, they lived in the area. They knew the mountains and hills there. Drew didn't. So off they went. I heard later that they only saw me when the monster stood up and started to go up the hill. If that monster hadn't moved, they said they might not have noticed us. They said that it blended well with the log we were on. At some point, the snowmobiles caught up, and the Sasquatch knew the game was up. It dropped me in the snow and took off up and over the mountain. Drew's brothers got me on a snowmobile and took me back to the house. I was only in my underwear by that point, but no one said a word about it. I know they called the police and filed a report. There was a lot of talk wondering if it was a man who had tried to take me who was dressed up, but all of us agreed it wasn't. Even Drew's brothers said there's no way a man could outrun a snowmobile. Now, when the police came, I do remember talking to them, but heck if I know what was said or what the final report actually said. I remember almost nothing after the Sasquatch dropped me. I have no memory of riding on a snowmobile back to the house. I don't remember the chaos at the house when we got there either, but I was told it was pretty wild. Turned out Drew's mother, being a medical professional, knew someone who was a therapist or something like that, and they came out the next day. They talked to me. They wanted to assess my trauma level, and luckily, it really wasn't that bad. Drew and his parents were wonderful about all of this. I will never say anything but good about them. They and the rest of the family went above and beyond for me, and truthfully, until I was squatch-napped, I had one of the best Christmases of my young life. But when I asked my mom the next day if we could just please go home, my mom did not fight me. We went home the day after I asked. It's funny how a kid's mind works to smooth over things, isn't it? By the time I was back in class, the events of that Christmas day were mostly out of my mind. It was a couple years before I really let myself dwell on it. And that only happened because, well, I heard a missing persons report. They were talking about it, and they said that the clothing found from the victim was left inside out, like mine. That Sasquatch peeled the clothing off of me because it didn't know how to remove clothing. It turned the clothes inside out when it pulled them off of me. Like my pants. They were a weatherproof nylon pant with a tie at the top and some elastic. It didn't undo the tie. It just started pulling the pants down from the elastic waistband. and it peeled it off backwards, like grabbing the top of your sock and pulling it off your leg. Everything gets turned inside out. That's how it removed my clothing. It didn't unbutton, and it didn't pull it off the way we would. It just peeled them off and tossed them aside. Now that I'm an adult and a parent myself, and I still live in the Pacific Northwest, I am hyper aware of Sasquatch, and there isn't a Christmas that goes by that I don't think about the one where I believe I almost became Sasquatch's Christmas dinner. And I, along with everyone at Drew's house that day, believed that was what almost happened. Now, Drew's brothers were unanimous and believed that once the Sasquatch knew snowmobiles were in pursuit, it made a decision and it knew it couldn't outrun the snowmobiles. So it dropped me, knowing they would probably stop the pursuit for me. And that's what happened. Those things are smarter than people give them credit for. I tell you true. I think the unusual sound of kids carrying on that hill drew the Sasquatch in close from wherever it had been. And when it saw that one child was by itself, that being me, even for just a small bit of time, it took its chance, and it took me. I wish I could give a more detailed description on the Sasquatch, but the truth is, it's all a lot fuzzy. No pun intended. I have told you what I can. Unfortunately, my mom and Drew did not end up getting married, and I was a little disappointed. He was a really nice guy, but as usual, my mom messed it up. Anyway, Merry Squatchmas to you and to all the Sasquad. This isn't much that I've been able to share, but I shared what I could. Thank you, signed, Caleb. Well, Caleb, I personally think that was a lot to share. That was a nail biter for me. You know, I have always wondered about these reports of clothes that are found turned inside out. Why they'll find shoes for people that are missing. You know, now I really wonder even more. All right, well, listen, folks, I think that's going to call it a good night and an end to the 10th day of Squatchmas. But we'll be meeting up here again tomorrow for the 11th day of Squatchmas. And until we do, always remember, absence of proof is not proof of absence. Thanks for listening.